All right, next we will look at the state government, politics and institutions. So we're going to look at the politics of the state and how that politics works. Now, Texas historically has a low voter turnout. That means you have lower than the national average when people show up to vote. In Texas, the state's legislature, and of course this is national, the state's legislatures, according to the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, determines the times, the places, and manner of holding elections. So how you experience voting in Texas is not going to be the same as how you experience voting in California or New York or any other state, right? And so in Texas, we've seen things like redistricting and gerrymandering at a high level. This is when our state legislature draws the electoral maps, right, electoral districts, and we're seeing that more and more those districts are created to make sure that the members of the legislative branch choose us rather than we choose them, all right? And so that is part of the politics here in the South and here in Texas. A couple of things that we are going to learn under elections. Now, to win an election in Texas, you need to know a few things. Number one, you start with a primary election. A primary election is a nonpartisan election. Now, nonpartisan means there's no multiple parties or multiple factions involved. It's one party issue, okay? We have a party, we have a position open, but we have three people who want the same position. So we have to hold an election to determine which member of our party will take that position. That is what a primary election is. If somebody, another thing about a primary election to know is the primary election uses a plurality rule. Plurality rule means that you have to get over 50% of the vote to be declared the party's candidate, right? If nobody gets over 50%, we go to a second election called a runoff election. And therefore, in a runoff election, that's when the person with the highest, the two people with the highest votes will run again, and whoever has the most votes will now become the candidate for our party. So we start with the primary. After the primary, so we start with a primary, and in a primary we may have a runoff election. Now that is nonpartisan, right? After that, we can now go to the midterms and the general election. Here, it's a partisan race because now each party has chosen which of their candidates will run. So now here we have two groups contesting in the various election. Now, a general election is when the President of the United States is running. A midterm election is halfway in the 4-year term. All right. Now, in the midterm is when most state officers run for office. So this is where we have governors and all the executives and a lot of the judges run for office. Okay. And so, and we'll talk about that. Now, we have the runoff, we have the general midterm. I've already explained that. Now, here, like I said, this is called the majority principle. In the majority principle means in a primary election, you have to get over 50% plus one, right? You have to get a majority of the votes to go to the next level. Unless nobody gets it and you go to a runoff election, then whoever gets the most votes then goes to the next one. Now, here we use plurality. In the plurality rule, in a partisan election, partisan means now two parties versus non-partisan. Now, plurality is not about getting over 50%, it's just whoever has the most votes by percentage. So you just have to have the highest votes, and whoever has the highest votes is declared the winner, right? And so remember all of those terms. Now, historically, as we said, Texas used to be Democratic. But what we find is from the 1940s, with President Truman signing the Executive Order 9981 that ended segregation in the military, we find that continuously national Democrats who have been elected to national offices in D.C. began to have civil rights as part of their agenda. And so in the Democratic National Convention of 48, Senator Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota proposed civil rights as part of the party's agenda. And of course, this led to the Southerners, who would call themselves Dixiecrats, feeling alienated because they wanted to continue with segregation and Jim Crow. Now, their campaign, of course, during this time was segregation now, segregation forever. Now, Democrats at the national level continued to push for civil rights, and really Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas will really be the turning point, because he signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1965 Voting Rights Act. And as he did this, Lyndon B. Johnson would say, which 635, the road over here, is named after, LBJ, that we have just signed over the South to the Republican Party. So the Republican Party switched its stance than what it was in the mid-1800s. They were no longer the party of Lincoln. They were no longer the party of ending slavery or enfranchisement. They switched, and whether you're talking about 1964, conservative Barry Goldwater, who led with the Dixiecrat ideology, and then to the national Democrats like Strom Thurmond, who switched parties from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. The Republican Party began using what was called the Southern strategy, appealed to the Southerners wanting for separation of races, and also local governments, conservative governments. And so Nixon actually ran in 1968 with this Southern strategy, and therefore the Southern states accepted and began to accept the Republican Party as the party that held their values and their views. And slowly over time, it's really, again, it's a long stretch from the 40s all the way through the 90s, we've seen a continuous redding of the South, and the Republican Party will become the stronghold party. And so that's a little bit of the politics of how Texas moved from being a Democratic state to a red Republican state. And we saw this even increase further with Obama's second term into Trump, and we've seen it further with the use of redistricting and through gerrymandering. And so all of these things have cumulated to Texas becoming a solid red state, although recently we've been seeing challenges to that. All right, and so that is Texas politics.